The field stretched endlessly, a wasteland of broken corn stalks left to rot after the harvest. Winter had hardened the earth, each step across it sounding like brittle glass breaking. The wind never stopped. It tore across the open land, sharp as knives, carrying the bitter smell of snow and smoke from distant chimneys. Nothing should have been alive out there. And yet, if you looked closely, you could see him. A dog, or rather, the shadow of one. He moved like smoke, low to the ground, blending with the dying grass. His ribs pressed like bones of a bird against his matted fur, his frame stripped of all softness. He had no collar, no sign of belonging. His paws were cracked from the frozen earth, bleeding in lines that crusted over, reopened, and bled again. At night, he curled beneath the leaning remains of a wooden shed, wind howling through the gaps. His body curled so tightly it seemed as though he might fold into himself entirely. For 3 winters he endured this exile. The farmers who drove by at dawn sometimes caught a glimpse of him, amber eyes flashing like lanterns in the dark. They whispered stories about him in the market, the phantom shepherd, the ghost in the field. Some believed he had once belonged to someone who lived nearby, someone who had left and never returned. Others said he had been dumped, discarded like trash. No one could say for certain. All they knew was that he did not come close. No matter who stopped, no matter what they offered, he always stayed at a distance, half in this world, half out of it. Still he survived. Through storms that buried the earth in white, through summers when the field turned to dust, he kept breathing. Each season stripped him thinner, but his fire never went out completely. Hunger gnawed at his belly, thirst cracked his tongue, loneliness hollowed his chest. Yet every dusk he rose. He padded across the frozen rows as if keeping a silent vigil, waiting for something he could not name. On the 3rd winter, the cold was crueler than ever. Ice clung to his fur like thorns, snow filled the hollows where he tried to sleep. Nights stretched longer, darker, biting into his flesh. It was then, when his strength was nearly gone, that fate changed its course. It happened on a morning when the sky was the color of ash, clouds heavy with the promise of another storm. He had curled into himself near the edge of the road, his body barely visible against the snow. He did not rise when the sound of tires approached. Normally he would have vanished like mist, darting into the field before anyone came too close. But this time he was too tired, too cold, too broken. The car slowed. Inside, a woman gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles pale. She had driven this road for years, yet something made her stop that day. She had almost passed him by, dismissing the dark shape as nothing more than a log or a mound of ice. But something in her chest twisted, a whisper that told her to look again. She pulled over, her tires crunching against snow and gravel. Her breath caught as she saw the eyes. Amber, sunken, yet burning. Eyes that stared straight into her, unblinking, carrying the weight of years. She opened her door, the wind tearing it from her hand, and stepped out. Her boots sank deep into the snow with a muffled crunch. She pulled her coat tighter around her, each breath turning into mist before her face. He didn't move, not forward, not back. Only his eyes followed her. The woman's throat tightened. The air between them felt sacred, fragile, like a thread stretched taut. She wanted to run to him, to scoop him up, to end this misery immediately, but instinct told her that one wrong step would break the fragile line of trust that hadn't even formed yet. So she lowered her gaze, softened her voice, and let the wind carry her words. "Please," she whispered. The shepherd's ears twitched. He tilted his head almost imperceptibly, as though the word had reached a place buried deep inside him. His body trembled, not from fear alone, but from exhaustion. Snowflakes clung to his lashes, his breath ragged in the frozen air. Minutes passed. The woman remained where she was, her boots planted, her heart racing. She thought of turning back. What if he bolted? What if she made things worse? But something inside her refused. She could not leave. Finally, the shepherd rose to his feet. His legs were thin, wobbly, but there was still a quiet dignity in the way he stood, chest lifted against the storm. He did not approach, but he did not run. His eyes locked onto hers, steady, unwavering. It was as though he was asking her a question no one else had ever stayed long enough to hear. "Would you hurt me too?" The woman's breath shook as she crouched slightly, lowering herself closer to the earth. She opened her palm, empty, showing him she had nothing to hide. The wind howled between them, carrying her scent across the snow. The shepherd's nose quivered. He shifted his weight, paws sinking deeper into the frost. His body leaned forward half an inch, then froze again, as if caught in the war between hunger and fear. For a long time, neither moved. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, the woman reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out a scrap of bread she had saved from her breakfast, trembling as she set it gently on the ground. She pushed it forward with her boot, then backed away a step, her hands visible, her eyes lowered. The shepherd stared at the offering. His ribs heaved with each breath. For a moment it seemed he might turn away, vanish back into the field as he always had. But instead, his paw lifted. It pressed into the snow with a crunch, then another. Step by step, he closed the distance, not to her, but to the bread. When his teeth finally closed around it, the woman felt her chest collapse with relief. Tears blurred her vision, hot against the freezing air. She didn't reach for him. She didn't speak again. She only watched, silent, as he chewed each bite with trembling jaws. When it was gone, he lifted his head once more. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Not yet trust, not yet safety, but the first fragile crack in the wall of his isolation. And for the first time in 3 winters, the ghost in the field did not disappear. He stayed. The woman could not sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those ember eyes staring back at her, burning through the storm. They were eyes that held both defiance and despair, the eyes of a creature too proud to beg, yet too tired to keep fighting. She tossed in bed, listening to the hum of the heater, thinking of him curled beneath the broken shed, with only the wind for company. When dawn finally cracked across the sky, her decision was already made. She filled a bag with scraps of food and drove back to the field. He was there, exactly where she had left him. At first, he didn't move. He only watched from the same patch of snow near the shed, his body low, his chest rising with shallow breaths. But when she stepped out of the car, his ears lifted, just slightly. She placed the food down, careful not to come too close, and returned to her car. Through the window, she watched him. Minutes passed, the cold numbing her fingers, even inside the vehicle. Then, when she had nearly lost hope, he rose. Thin legs wobbled beneath him, but he walked forward, paws sinking into the snow. His nose twitched, his eyes scanning for danger. Only when he was certain she would not approach did he lower his head to eat. The woman's throat tightened with relief. It wasn't much, just scraps from her kitchen, but the way he devoured them told her it mattered. She promised herself she would return. And she did. Day after day she came back, never empty-handed. Sometimes she brought chicken, sometimes bread, sometimes small pieces of meat cooked just for him. She never forced herself closer. She simply placed the food down, then waited. The shepherd always came, but always cautiously, always stopping several feet away from her. His body trembled if she shifted too quickly, his eyes darting like a trapped animal. The field became their meeting place. The wind was their companion, the snow their silent witness. She began speaking softly when she arrived, her voice steady, patient. She told him stories he couldn't understand, but the sound seemed to calm him. Her words filled the silence that had once consumed his nights. Slowly, the rhythm of her presence began to etch itself into his world. Weeks passed, and a fragile pattern emerged. He began waiting for her. Each time she arrived, he saw him closer to the road, his body no longer hidden deep within the field. His eyes no longer burned with suspicion alone. There was something else there now, something hesitant but undeniable. Hope. The first thaw came late that year. Ice dripped from the shed, the snow retreating in patches to reveal dark, wet earth beneath. The woman arrived one morning carrying a piece of roasted chicken wrapped in foil. She crouched lower than before, setting the food down only a few feet away. Her knees ached from the cold ground, but she didn't move. The shepherd stood at the edge of his invisible line. His ears flicked back, his tail tucked. Hunger gnawed at him, but fear weighed heavier. His paws shifted restlessly, pressing into the softening earth. For minutes nothing happened. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then something broke. Step by trembling step, he moved forward. His head hung low, his muscles taut as bowstrings, ready to flee at the slightest sound. But he kept walking, closer, closer. The woman's heart pounded in her chest, every second stretched into eternity. Finally, he reached the food. His nose brushed the foil. He looked up, meeting her gaze. For the first time she was close enough to see the streaks of frost tangled in his fur, the scars etched across his skin. He took the chicken. The woman bit her lip to hold back tears. Her hand trembled where it rested on her knee, not daring to move. She whispered, almost inaudible, "Good boy." The shepherd froze at the sound. Then, slowly, he ate. It was a single step, but it was everything. From that day forward, the distance between them shrank. Each visit brought him closer, each offering met with less hesitation. Sometimes he startled, retreating when her boots shifted against the earth, but he always returned. He began associating her presence not with fear, but with life, warmth, food, safety. Then came the moment she had waited for. It was a morning thick with fog, the air damp and heavy. She crouched low as always, holding out her hand this time, palm open, a small strip of meat resting on it. Her heart hammered so loudly she was certain she could hear it. The shepherd stood only feet away, his eyes flicking from her hand to her face. His body trembled violently. For what felt like hours he hovered at the edge of decision. Then, as if something inside him finally broke free, he stepped forward. His nose touched her palm, warm and damp, his teeth brushing her skin as he took the food. The woman gasped softly, the world spinning around her. She felt the sharp sting of tears fill her eyes. She wanted to reach out, to bury her hands in her fur, to hold him, but she didn't. She stayed still, her chest rising with silent sobs. For the first time in 3 years, the shepherd had taken food from a human hand, from her hand. That night, she sat in her car long after he had retreated back to his shed. She stared at her palm, still tingling where his nose had touched it, and whispered into the silence, "We're going to make it, you and I." But the truth loomed over her like a storm cloud. Winter was not yet over, and his body was weak. She had seen the way he stumbled when he walked, the way his legs sometimes buckled beneath him. Time was running out. If she didn't act soon, she might lose him forever. And so the fragile bond they had built was about to face its first test, one that could either break everything apart or save his life. The storm rolled in without warning. Clouds bruised the sky a deep, menacing gray, and the wind carried with it the smell of ice and rain. By evening, the field was swallowed in a thick curtain of snow, each flake sharp as glass as it stung the air. The woman drove down the same road she had driven every day for weeks, her wipers fighting against the whiteout. Her hands clenched the steering wheel, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. She hadn't seen him the day before, and though she told herself it was only the storm, a deeper voice whispered a darker truth. When she pulled up to the field, her heart sank. The shed, barely standing against the gale, loomed ahead, but the patch of snow where he usually waited was empty. Panic flared through her. She stepped out, the storm instantly biting into her skin, and called softly into the wind, "Boy, it's me. I'm here." Silence. Her boots crunched as she forced herself into the field, snow soaking into her jeans, her breath shallow. Then she saw him. He was curled tightly near the shed, his body half covered in drifting snow. For a terrible moment, she thought he was gone. Her chest collapsed, and she stumbled forward, kneeling beside him. His fur was ice-crusted, his ribs too still. But then, faintly, his chest rose, a shallow breath, weak, rattling. "God," she whispered, tears instantly spilling hot down her face. "Please don't leave me now." She reached out, her hand hovering above his body. He didn't flinch, not this time. His body was too weak to resist. With trembling arms, she slid her coat beneath him, lifting him against her chest. He was shockingly light, his bones pressing into her as though he were hollow. His head lolled against her arm, his breath faint. The drive to the vet was a blur of red lights and pounding heartbeats. She whispered to him the entire way, her voice breaking. "Stay with me, just a little longer. Please, don't give up now." She didn't even realize when she started calling him Ash, the name falling from her lips unbidden, as though the gray of his fur, the ghostliness of his form, had demanded a name at last. The clinic door swung open as she burst inside, cradling Ash against her chest. The staff reacted instantly, rushing forward to take him from her arms. "He's hypothermic," a nurse said quickly. Another voice added, "Severely malnourished. Get him on fluids." The woman staggered after them, her knees weak, her fingers raw from the cold. She pressed her hand against the glass window of the treatment room as they laid him on the metal table. Tubes, wires, blankets, the sterile brightness of the clinic clashed cruelly with the fragility of his thin, trembling body. The vet, a middle-aged woman with steady hands, turned to her briefly. "You need to know, he's critical. 3 winters like this, his body's shutting down. If we don't stabilize him now, we may lose him tonight." The words struck her like a blow. She leaned against the wall, her breath shaky. "Please," she whispered, "do everything. Just don't give up on him." The next hours unfolded in fragments, each one a battle.
Heated blankets wrapped around his fragile frame, warm IV fluids dripped into his veins. Oxygen hissed softly through a tube near his muzzle. His temperature barely rose. At one point, the heart monitor shrieked in a jagged alarm, his rhythm faltering. The woman's knees buckled as if she had been struck, tears blurring her vision. She pressed her forehead against the glass, whispering his name, his new name, over and over. "Ash, stay. Please stay. You're not alone anymore." Inside, the vet worked tirelessly. "Come on, boy," she muttered under her breath, as though urging him through sheer will. "You've made it this far. Don't stop now." The monitor steadied for a moment, then faltered again. Each dip was a dagger. Each beep was a fragile miracle. At last, after what felt like years compressed into hours, Ash's chest began to rise more evenly. His breaths deepened, no longer the shallow gasps of a fading life. The vet lifted her eyes to the woman through the glass, her expression shifting, not to certainty, but to possibility. "He's fighting," she said softly. The woman collapsed into the chair outside the treatment room, burying her face in her hands as sobs tore from her chest. Relief and terror mingled inside her. He wasn't safe, not yet, but he hadn't let go. He had chosen to fight. Through the long hours of the night, she refused to leave his side. The clinic dimmed, the staff rotated, but she remained by the window, whispering softly whenever his body stirred beneath the blankets. In those moments, she swore she saw his ears twitch, faintly, as though her voice was guiding him back from the edge. Near dawn, when the first thin light crept through the blinds, the vet came to her side. "He's not out of the woods. He's severely underweight and infections are still a risk, but if we can get him through the next few days, he has a chance." The woman nodded, tears streaking her face. She pressed her palm against the glass once more, whispering to the fragile shadow on the table. "Hear that, Ash? You have a chance. We're going to make it." Inside the treatment room, his chest rose and fell, steady now, fragile, imperfect, but steady. For the first time in 3 winters, the ghost in the field wasn't alone in his fight for life.